Hello and welcome to another podcast from Assisi. My name is Solanus Mary. The Basilica of St. Francis here in Assisi really is a treasure of art and architecture, a topic on which I intend to do the occasional podcast. Today, let us begin to realise this intention. Construction of the Lower Basilica began around 1230. It was built in the Roman style of architecture. This style of architecture can easily be identified by the round arches on the ceiling. In addition, the walls are quite thick and generally do not support windows. These, coupled with a combination of low ceilings, give the basilica a sort of dark, enclosed atmosphere. To the right and to the left of the nave can be found a series of side chapels. In contrast to the lower basilica itself, these chapels are built in the Gothic style of architecture. This can be seen from the arches at the entrance, which are pointed as opposed to round, and stained glass windows abound. To begin with, let's explain a little of the origin of these side chapels. Construction of the chapels began in the late 13th century. In those days, it was quite common for many wealthy people to have private chapels in their private castles and mansions. Once the basilica was finished and St. Francis's remains were entombed beneath a high altar, wealthy people desired to build private chapels in the basilica. Hence began the building of the side chapels. The side chapels were built in the Gothic style of architecture because this style of architecture was in vogue at that time, having arrived into Italy from Northern Europe. The side chapels are very beautiful in their own right, and today I want to talk about one in particular. As one enters the main body of the Lower Basilica, St. Martin's Chapel is the first side chapel encountered on the left-hand side as one faces the high altar. It is generally considered the most ornate of all the side chapels. Before discussing the artwork, I want to say a little about the saint to whom the chapel is dedicated, St. Martin of Tours. St. Martin lived in the 4th century, some 800 years or so before St. Francis. He was born in present-day Hungary, but lived most of his life in France. Following the footsteps of his father, he became a soldier in the Roman army. He was attracted to the Christian faith from an early age. Not long after receiving baptism, he was released from the army, and he departed for Poitiers in France to seek out its famous bishop, St. Hilary. Under this holy bishop, Martin lived out a holy monastic life. Martin eventually went on to become the Bishop of Tours in France. Martin was known for his zeal, his willingness to travel far and wide to spread the faith, and to bring peace and reconciliation. He died at the close of the 4th century. His cult was very popular during the Middle Ages, not just in France, but throughout the continent of Europe. His feast day is kept on the 11th of November. There are several scenes in the life of St. Martin that are paralleled later on in the life of St. Francis, to the extent that St. Francis's first biographer, Thomas of Celano, referred to him as the new St. Martin. For instance, Martin had been a soldier. Francis had also been a soldier. Martin left everything to give his life totally to God. Francis gave up everything to do the same and to begin the Franciscan order. Martin went on to become a zealous peacemaker, and of course Francis is known to all in our day, and indeed in his own day, as the great peacemaker. One cold day, early on in his life, Martin encountered a beggar, and taking pity on him, cut his cloak in two and gave one half to the beggar. And early in the life of Francis, we are told how one day he met an impoverished knight and gave away all of his cloak to the poor knight. As I said already, there was a great devotion to St. Martin of Tours on the continent during the Middle Ages. Indeed, traditions relating to him have even seeped into the everyday culture. Let me give you some examples. After his death, St. Martin's cloak, the part that he kept, was placed in a reliquary. In those days, reliquaries were made in the form of a small church. The word for cloak is cappa, and a piece of a cloak is cappella. The faithful wanted to venerate the cappella, hence the origin of our word for a small church, cappella, or in the English language, chapel. In English-speaking countries, we refer to a late summer, that is, in late autumn, as an Indian summer. However, in some countries on the continent, the same phenomenon is known as St. Martin's summer. For example, in Italy, l'estate di San Martino. Probably because of the approaching feast day of St. Martin. Many countries on the continent enjoy a special meal on the eve of St. Martin's Day, that is on the 10th of November. In Italy, the feast comprises castagne calderoste and vino novello, that is roasted chestnuts and new wine. Danish pilgrims have told me that their meal comprises a cooked goose. During the First World War, the head of the Allied forces was Field Marshal Foch, a good Catholic, by the way, who tried to hear Mass every day. I wonder if it was Foch who decided on the 11th of November as being the Armistice Day, this day being the feast day of the great peacemaker of the 4th century, St. Martin of Tours. And there is an old tradition in Ireland, tradition with a small t, I hasten to add, that St. Patrick and St. Martin were distant relations. This is only a short piece about the life of St. Martin of Tours to help give you an understanding of the artwork in the chapel. The chapel itself was constructed under the patronage of the Franciscan Cardinal Gentile da Montefiore. It was dedicated to St. Martin of Tours, the Cardinal's patron saint. We know that the chapel was still under construction when the Cardinal died in 1312, as he had to be buried in St. Stephen's Chapel opposite. During the 1997 earthquake, the chapel suffered some damage. Major restoration work has been carried out in recent years, with the work finishing in 2021. The walls and the entrance arch are decorated with scenes from the life of St. Martin, frescoed in the second decade of the 14th century by Simone Martini, an artist from the Siena School of Art. The lower register is devoted to stories related to St. Martin as a young knight, the second to his period as a bishop, and the vault to his death and funeral, the whole reflecting the progress from earth to heaven. Number 1, St. Martin divides his cloak with a beggar. Number 2, Christ appears to St. Martin in his sleep, wearing the said cloak. Number 3, St. Martin receives the knightly investiture. Number 4, St. Martin renounces the life of arms and faces the enemy armed only with the cross. Number 5, St. Martin raises a child from the dead. Number 6, the dream of St. Ambrose, or St. Martin meditating in the church. Number 7, 2 angels dress the arms of St. Martin, who gave his tunic to a beggar. Number 8, the Emperor Valentinian, frightened by the fire of his throne, renders homage to St. Martin. Number 9, the death of St. Martin. Number 10, the funeral of St. Martin. And finally, number 11, Cardinal Gentile da Partino da Montefiore, patron of the chapel, kneels in front of St. Martin. The entrance arch shows 8 full-length figures of saints. Number 1, St. Clare of Assisi. Number 2, St. Elizabeth of Hungary. Number 3, St. Mary Magdalene. Number 4, St. Catherine of Alexandria. Number 5, St. Francis of Assisi. Number 6, St. Anthony of Padua. Number 7, St. Louis of Toulouse. And number 8, King St. Louis of France. The chapel is decorated with 3 large stained glass windows. These are the work of Giovanni di Bonino, based on colour drawings by Martini. More saints are depicted in displays of these windows. Do remember to take a good look around St. Martin's Chapel when you come to visit the Basilica. I do hope that you have enjoyed this podcast today, and we look forward to your presence again next time. Until then, this is Fra Solanus Mary saying thank you for listening, and God bless.